as well as bloodthirsty massacre. It speaks with a sensibility that belongs to poetry and painting, and yet, as we architects proclaim, a sensibility even beyond, which must be called architecturalism, a term that has to be coined to do it justice. The time that was left for Liang and Lin and for the Institute of Research on Chinese Architecture was very limited. In 1931, the Japanese occupied Manchuria. A few years later, they began to invade North China.
他说，当时日本人进攻中国，好像已经这个企图已经很明显了。他说我和梁先生两个都清楚地认识到，我们必须在最短的时间里面把这个华北的古建筑、重要的古建筑全部吊塌，否则就来不及了。
On December 9th, 1935, a student movement broke out in Beiping against the so-called self-autonomy of North China staged by the Japanese. Warfare loomed over China. At the end of the year, the Fairbanks prepared to end their 4-year-long visit in China and return home.
In December 1935, no fortitude was required of us. Wilma and I were going on our way to a happier world.
You see, I was biculturally brought up, and there is no denying that bicultural contact and activity is essential to me. Before you two really came into our lives here at number 3, I was always somewhat lost and had a sense of lack somewhere, a certain spiritual poverty that needed nourishing. The picnics and riding this autumn, or rather early winter, made a whole world of difference to me.
Leaving friends like the Liangs was traumatic. We had learned from each other and given each other all we could. Phyllis had become the closest friend to both of us. Our departure was a real heartbreak.
4 years earlier, the two couples had met by chance in Beiping. The first time they parted, they were each about to start the best chapters of their lives. Years later, when they met again, the Fairbanks were setting off to reach the peaks of their careers. Yet their best Chinese friends had already finished the best part of their journey. Thereafter, their lives would be spent in incessant warfare and political campaigns, and disease and torture would accompany them until the very end of their lives. In the summer of 1937, Liang Sicheng and Lin Huiyin entrusted their daughter and son to Liang's elder sister Sushun. Together with Mo Zongjiang and others, they embarked on their third trip to Shanxi. Years of field trips had unearthed numerous ancient Chinese architectural structures, which were then surveyed, mapped, and graphed. There was, however, a lingering disappointment. Was it true that one could see wooden architecture of the Tang Dynasty only in Japan, the Horyuji in Nara, the pride and joy of Japanese scholars? Over the past 6 years, Liang Sicheng had prayed on each journey that they would encounter a miracle. In the summer of 1937, Liang Sicheng took a book by the French scholar Paul Pellois on a trip to Shanxi. He identified an important clue from it. Based on that clue, Liang would search for his dream of discovering extant Tang architecture on Wutai Mountain. We rode on mules. The roads were steep and serpentine. Sometimes we passed near the edge of cliffs, a danger that we had to endure. Plowed fields followed the turns in the mountain, in which a great variety of forests flourished. It took them 2 days on the mountain roads to reach Do village in Taiwei. At dusk, a temple reflecting the beautiful sunlight stood in front of them. This was the Jinrongchan Temple of Buddha's Light, the Temple of Buddha's Light on the Dunhuang fresco. Liang described his feeling as startled by surprise, sighing with happiness upon entering the main hall of the Buddha Light Temple. The hall had only one level, with gigantic brackets, simple and majestic, and eaves hanging deep and reaching far. With a glimpse, it could be immediately concluded that the hall was of ancient provenance. But would it be the oldest architectural structure dating earlier than all known construction? The space below the ceiling of the hall was like a dark, empty loft. We climbed up there through the gap below the eaves. Inches of dust were piled on the floor, which, when we stepped onto it, felt like cotton. By torchlight, we could see thousands of bats jostling on the lintel, and they were hard to drive away. When we took photos, the scared bats took flight from the flashes and stirred up an unbearable stench. Millions of bed bugs hid in the timber. Our work there was real torment. Only after days did we find hints of ink at the bottom of the beam in the hall. They finally discovered the characters which proved that the Temple of the Buddha's Light had been built in 857 AD, during the Dazhong period of the Tang Dynasty. A great discovery had been made. This is the only wooden structure of the Tang Dynasty that we have been searching for years. It is not only the crown of ancient Chinese architecture, but stands as a treasure from China's feudal cultural legacy. The hall is a Tang construction. Moreover, it houses precious Tang statues, paintings, and ink. 4 arts in one. The Temple of Buddha's Light is indeed a rarity among the extant relics. This was the most splendid day in the lives of Liang and Lin, and yet, from this day onwards, their fates began to change. Their daughter, who was then in Beidaihe, received a letter from her mother.
Baby, Mommy doesn't know how to tell you so many things, so I will tell you them one by one. We first took a carriage and then rode mules as we moved slowly. We were very busy, so we did not reach Dai County until July the 12th. There, we could buy newspapers and send telegrams, and we began to learn a bit about the news.
On July 12, 1937, Liang and Lin left Wutai Mountain. It was only then that they learned that 5 days earlier, when they were still immersed in the ecstasy of discovering the Temple of Buddha's Light, the July 7th incident had taken place in Beiping.
Now I will tell you why the Japanese made trouble for us this time. You know, they always coveted our North China, and this time they again invented an excuse to attack us with their huge army. We hope things can be settled without a war, but if the Japanese insist on occupying Beiping, we are all willing to fight. Then you can stay with your aunt, and we will stay in Beiping until the war is won. I feel that now, as Chinese, we must be brave and fear nothing. We must live and fight with determination.
Liang Sicheng's dream was realized, but at the same time, a nightmare was being unleashed. Overnight, the long-brewing July 7th incident would change the lives of all Chinese.